May 1st, 1943. Somewhere over the coast of France, at 14,000 feet, Staff Sergeant Maynard Harrison Smith is standing in the waist section of a B-17 bomber that is on fire. He's 31 years old, a hillbilly from Michigan, the worst airman in the 423rd Bombardment Squadron. Nobody wanted him on this mission. His nickname is Snuffy, not because he's tough, because he's lazy, a scheming screw-up who skipped training, talked back to officers, and somehow weaseled his way onto combat duty just to get out of cleaning latrines. Right now, he's peeing on the flames. The extinguishers are empty, the hydraulic fluid is burning, the oxygen system has exploded, 2 crewmen have already bilayed out, the tail gunner is unconscious in the back, bleeding from shrapnel wounds. Snuffy is alone in a metal tube that smells like melted rubber and burning hair. And he's urinating on the fire because there is nothing else left to do. This plane is going to land in exactly 47 minutes. But the moment it touches the runway at RAF Predanak, it will snap in half like a popsicle stick. August 18th, 1944. Lieutenant Royce C. Priest is sitting in the cockpit of a P-51 Mustang over the English Channel, and he cannot feel his legs. Not because he's wounded, because there is another man sitting on top of him. Major Burt Marshall, his squadron commander, is crammed into Priest's lap like a passenger in a clown car. Marshall's back is pressed against the instrument panel. His knees are folded up into his chest. His parachute harness is digging into Priest's ribs. The P-51 Mustang cockpit is 38 inches wide. It was designed for one human being. Right now, there are 2. Priest can't see the airspeed indicator. He can't reach the throttle without elbowing Marshall in the kidneys. His hands are wrapped around the control stick like he's strangling it, and Marshall's boots are jammed against the canopy glass so hard it's starting to fog. Marshall's circulation is cut off. His hands are going numb. His breathing is shallow. They have been flying like this for 35 minutes. And they still have to land. Here's what happened. 2 hours earlier, Major Marshall's P-51 was hit by flak over northern France. The engine seized. The prop windmilled and died. He bilayed out over enemy territory and landed in a field controlled by the French resistance. They radioed for extraction. Lieutenant Priest volunteered. He flew back alone, landed in a farmer's field, and told Marshall to climb in. Marshall looked at the cockpit. He looked at Priest. He said, "There's no room." Priest said, "Get in anyway." So Marshall squeezed himself into the footwell, then crawled onto Priest's lap. Priest wrapped his arms around him like a seatbelt. The canopy barely closed. The plane was 200 pounds over its maximum takeoff weight. Priest gunned the throttle. The Mustang skipped across the dirt like a stone on water, clawed into the air, and somehow stayed airborne. Now they're descending toward RAF Steeple Morden. The engine is overheating. The oil temperature gauge is pinned in the red. The Merlin engine is stuttering, coughing, threatening to quit. Priest can't see the runway. Marshall's head is blocking his view. He lands by memory. The wheels kiss the asphalt, the tail drops, the engine rattles to a stop. Ground crews sprint toward the plane, expecting to pull out a dying man. Instead, they watch 2 pilots unfold themselves from the cockpit like circus performers squeezing out of a phone booth. Marshall can't stand. His legs are dead from the knees down. Priest has to help him out. The twist. General Jimmy Doolittle, the same man who led the raid on Tokyo, heard about the stunt and wanted Priest court-martialed. Why? Because Priest disobeyed a direct order. He wasn't authorized to land in occupied France. He risked a P-51, one of the most valuable fighters in the European theater, to rescue one man. Doolittle was furious. But the press got hold of the story first. So instead of a court-martial, Priest got the Distinguished Service Cross. and Marshall got his legs back after 3 hours of circulation, returning in agonizing pins and needles. If you want to help rescue these forgotten stories from dusty archives and keep the memory of these men alive, hit that like button right now. Because what you're about to hear next is even more impossible. Let's go back to Snuffy Smith. May 1st, 1943, over the coast of France. The B-17 he's on, tail number 649, nicknamed Eager Beaver, was supposed to be a milk run, a quick bombing mission to Saint Nazaire, in and out. But 15 minutes after the bomb drop, German FW-190 fighters swarmed them like hornets. Cannon shells ripped through the fuselage. One shell hit the radio room. The radio operator bailated out immediately. Another shell punctured the oxygen system. It exploded in a blue fireball that filled the waist section with flames. The ball turret gunner bailated out. The tail gunner, Roy Gibson, was hit by shrapnel. He collapsed in the back, bleeding from his legs and face, unable to move. Snuffy Smith was the only man left in the rear of the plane. Here's the situation. The fire is spreading. The hydraulic lines are burning. The aluminum skin is starting to buckle from the heat. Snuffy grabs a fire extinguisher, empty. He grabs another, empty. The flames are creeping toward the ammunition boxes, 50 caliber rounds stacked in the waist section. If those boxes cook off, the plane explodes. Snuffy does the only thing he can think of. He starts throwing the boxes out of the open waist window. With his bare hands, some of the boxes are already smoldering. He can feel the heat through his gloves. His face is blistering. His lungs are scorched from the smoke. He throws out 12 boxes. Then he realizes the fire is still spreading. So he unzips his flight suit and starts peeing on the flames. It doesn't put the fire out, but it buys him time. He crawls back to the tail section. Roy Gibson is unconscious, bleeding into his oxygen mask. Snuffy drags him forward, away from the fire, and starts applying tourniquets with scraps of parachute cord. The plane is still flying. Barely. The pilot, Lewis Johnson, is fighting to keep the nose up. The elevator cables are half melted. The rudder is shot full of holes. The plane is shaking so hard the instrument panel is rattling. But they're still in the air. 47 minutes later, they reach RAF Prydanak in Cornwall. The landing gear drops. The wheels touch down smooth. For a moment, it looks like they've made it. Then the fuselage snaps in half. The fire melted the structural aluminum. The moment the weight shifted on landing, the rear section broke off like a detached train car. The front half skids to a stop. The tail section tumbles into the grass. Snuffy Smith crawls out of the wreckage, covered in soot and blood, and collapses on the tarmac. Roy Gibson survives. 3 months later, Secretary of War Henry Stimson flies to England to present Snuffy Smith with the Medal of Honor. He's the first enlisted man in the European theater to receive it. But when Stimson arrives at the base, Smith is missing. They find him in the mess hall kitchen on KP duty, kitchen police, scraping leftover food off trays. Why? Because 2 days earlier, his bunk failed inspection. His boots weren't shined. His uniform was wrinkled. So his commanding officer punished him. The Secretary of War had to pull him out of the kitchen, still wearing a greasy apron, to pin the Medal of Honor on his chest. Snuffy Smith never changed. After the war, he got kicked out of the Veterans of Foreign Wars for starting fights. He worked as a tax auditor. He died in 1984, alone, largely forgotten. A flawed man who did a perfect thing. January 1945. Stalag Luft I, Northern Germany. Captain Robert A. Bob Hoover has been a prisoner of war for 16 months. He was shot down over the Mediterranean in 1944 while flying a Spitfire, captured, sent to a POW camp near the Baltic Sea. For over a year, he's been planning his escape. Not through a tunnel, not by bribing a guard, by stealing an airplane. Here's the plan. The Germans are losing the war. The camp is surrounded by chaos, refugees fleeing west, supply lines collapsing, guards deserting. On January 15, 1945, a riot breaks out in the camp. Prisoners set fire to the barracks. Guards scramble to contain the chaos. In the confusion, Bob Hoover slips through the fence. He's wearing a stolen Luftwaffe flight jacket. His face is smeared with dirt to hide his sunburn. All POWs had that pale, malnourished look. He walks 12 miles to the nearest German airfield. The airfield is nearly abandoned. A few ground crew, a handful of mechanics, most of the planes have been evacuated. But sitting on the tarmac, fueled and ready, is a Focke-Wulf 190, one of the Luftwaffe's best fighters. Hoover walks up to it like he owns it. A German mechanic approaches. Hoover points at the plane and gestures like he's about to take off. The mechanic nods. Here's the problem. The FW-190 uses an inertia starter. It requires a mechanic to hand crank a flywheel for 30 seconds before the engine fires. So the German mechanic cranks the engine for him. Hoover climbs in, straps in, the engine roars to life. He taxis down the runway and takes off. Now he's flying a Nazi fighter with a swastika on the tail toward Allied lines in Holland. He has no parachute, no radio, no identification. If he's spotted by Allied fighters, they'll shoot him down. If he's spotted by German flak, they'll shoot him down. He flies at 50 feet, skimming treetops, staying below radar. 20 minutes later, he crosses into Holland. The engine coughs, sputters, dies. Fuel starvation, the tank is empty. Hoover glides the FW-190 into a farmer's field and crash lands in the mud. The plane flips, the canopy cracks. Hoover crawls out bruised but alive. Then he sees the farmers. A dozen Dutch civilians running toward him. With pitchforks and shovels. They think he's a German pilot. Hoover starts screaming in English, I'm American, don't kill me." One of the farmers stops, squints, then yells something in Dutch. The pitchforks lower. They pull him out of the mud, give him water, and hide him in a barn until British forces arrive 2 days later. Bob Hoover survived. After the war, he became a test pilot. He was the backup pilot for Chuck Yeager's Sound Barrier flight in 1947. He spent the next 50 years performing air shows, flying planes with one engine shut off, pouring iced tea while doing a barrel roll. He died in 2016 at the age of 94. But he never forgot the German mechanic who cranked his engine. 3 men, 3 planes that should have crashed. Royce Priest landed a fighter with 2 men crammed into a single-seat cockpit. Maynard Smith survived a plane that broke in half the moment it touched the ground. Bob Hoover stole an enemy fighter, flew it across enemy lines, and crash-landed in a field, only to almost get killed by the people he was trying to reach. They didn't survive because they were the best. They survived because they refused to quit. Priest could have left Marshall in that field. Smith could have bilayed out with the others. Hoover could have stayed in that POW camp and waited for liberation. But they didn't. Maynard Smith died in 1984, a janitor, a troublemaker, a man nobody liked. But on May 1st, 1943, he was a hero. Bob Hoover became a legend. Royce Priest went back to flying and never spoke about the piggyback flight again. If you're watching from the US, UK, Canada, Australia, or anywhere else in the world, drop a comment and let me know. Because these men didn't fight for glory. They fought so we could sit here 80 years later and remember their names. Don't let them be forgotten.